Once there was a king who wanted to go hunting, must have been in the spring. The queen said to him, "Dear husband, do not put your hand on an animal. If you kill an animal carrying a child there in the wild, that fate may strike us, lay a curse on the family." The king was angry and said, "Woman, do not trouble your head. Woman, you have nothing to do with what I do. You rule inside behind the door. You spin lies and gossip. Am I getting involved in this? You should not interfere in my affairs. I rule outside the door. I create stories to tell." And with these words the king left and went hunting with his men. But it was as if the forest understood. When the king and his men arrived, trees stretching out the branches and separating the king from men. The king was lost. He rode until the forest ended and he came to the mountains. There he saw a stone that was open. It was the spring. The sun was high on the sky and lit up. Inside the stone, a forge. Swords and shields hung along the walls. Outside there stood a dwarf and leaned against the door with his eyes closed. The king knew, as everyone knew at that time, dwarfs were the very best blacksmiths. The king sneaked up and grabbed the dwarf. "Mercy," screamed the dwarf. "I will give you mercy if you can forge me a sword that will secure me victories and make my name known after my death." This the dwarf promised and asked the king to come back 7 days later. Then the dwarf disappeared into the stone that closed. 7 days later, the king was standing in front of the open stone, and there stood the dwarf with a sword covered with a cloth. Greedily the king seized the sword, but the dwarf held it back and said, "King, this sword is forged to give you victories in battle and war and spread your name into the future, but every blessing has its curse. Every time the sword is drawn, it must be covered with blood. It must kill before it finds rest. And whoever owns the sword will one day be affected by it. The curse will lie on the owner's family. They will be hit by the sword and its hunger. Your name will be known, but the name of the sword Tyrfing will be far more known." And with these words the dwarf jumped into the stone that closed. And everything the dwarf said happened. The king won and became famous, but died with his own sword in his hand, as did his son. And his son became a mighty warrior, carrying the sword. But this warrior wanted to break the curse. He brought the sword into his grave, so that his son should not be affected by the same fate. No one knows where this grave is. No one knows where this sword is. Death. By the grave there is a tree. Death is the beginning.